They met at a small town gathering on a warm spring evening. The place was filled with soft laughter, music from an old radio, and the smell of home-cooked food. He stood quietly in a corner holding a cup of tea, while she was surrounded by people, her laughter echoing softly across the room. There was something about her, something gentle yet full of life, that caught his attention. He was never the type to speak first. He had always been shy, more of a listener than a talker, but that night he found himself drawn toward her warmth. When she turned and smiled at him, it felt like time slowed down for a moment. She said hello in the kindest tone, and he managed a quiet smile in return. That was how it began, so simple yet so unforgettable. Over the weeks that followed, they started meeting more often. Sometimes it was at the small bakery in town, sometimes by the river where people liked to sit and talk as the sun went down. They spoke about their families, their dreams, and the kind of lives they hoped to build. He worked long hours at a repair shop, while she helped her mother run a small grocery. They didn't have much, but they shared a common hope: to live a life full of peace and love, no matter how simple. He admired her kindness. She had a way of listening that made everyone feel heard. When someone in town needed help, she was always the first to show up, bringing food or comfort without expecting anything in return. He often told her that she had the kind of heart that made the world softer. She would laugh and tell him he thought too much, but deep down she liked hearing it. Their love grew quietly. It wasn't built on grand gestures or expensive gifts. It was built on shared moments, walking home together in the rain, fixing broken things side by side, writing small notes that said, "Thinking of you." He would repair her bicycle when it broke, and she would bring him lunch when he worked late. They understood each other without needing too many words. When he finally gathered the courage to ask her to marry him, it wasn't a dramatic proposal. He simply said one evening, while sitting under a tree near the river, "I don't want to spend another day without you in my life." She smiled with tears in her eyes and whispered, "Then don't." That was enough. Their wedding was small, held in the backyard of her childhood home. Friends and family came together, bringing homemade food, flowers from their gardens, and heartfelt laughter. The day was not perfect. The wind blew away some of the decorations, and the cake fell slightly to one side. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the look they shared when they promised to stand by each other, no matter what life brought their way. The early years of their marriage were not easy. They lived in a tiny rented house with thin walls and a leaky roof. Money was always short. Some nights they had only bread and tea for dinner. But even then there was happiness. They found joy in the smallest things, sharing one blanket on cold nights, laughing over silly mistakes, dreaming together about a home they would one day own. He worked long hours to provide for them, often coming home tired and covered in grease from the workshop. She would be waiting by the door, dinner ready, a warm smile on her face. No matter how exhausted he was, her presence made everything better. She never complained about what they didn't have. Instead, she focused on what they did: a roof, food, and each other. Over time, their hard work started to pay off. They managed to buy a small piece of land and built a modest house with their own hands. It wasn't big, but every corner held a piece of their story. She painted the walls herself, choosing light colors that made the rooms feel bright. He built the wooden furniture, rough at first but filled with effort and love. That home became their pride, a place that echoed with laughter, arguments, music, and dreams. When they had their first child, their lives changed completely. Sleepless nights, endless responsibilities, and new worries filled their days, but they faced it all together. He would hold the baby so she could rest for a few hours, and she would stay up with him when he returned late, listening to him talk about his day. They weren't perfect, but they were a team. As the years passed, more children came, and so did more challenges. There were illnesses, bills that piled up, and days when they felt worn out from the world. Yet somehow they never gave up on each other. Even when they argued, it never lasted long. He would always be the first to say sorry, and she would always find a way to make peace. They learned that love wasn't about being right, it was about staying together. Time moved fast. The children grew up, left home, and started families of their own. The house that once felt too small now seemed too quiet. They filled their evenings with stories of the past, sitting side by side, holding hands like they did in their youth. Sometimes they would laugh about how poor they once were, remembering the nights they had to light candles because they couldn't afford electricity. Other times they sat in silence, content just to be near each other. He often looked at her and wondered how he had been so lucky. Even as age softened their faces and slowed their steps, she was still the same woman who had smiled at him at that first gathering years ago. Her hair had turned gray, her hands had wrinkles, but her eyes still carried that same warmth. Whenever she laughed, it still felt like sunshine filling the room. Sometimes he would tell her that he didn't know what life would be without her. She would smile, though her eyes would sometimes turn thoughtful, almost sad. He never noticed it much, thinking she was simply tired. But deep inside she was hiding something, a small weight she carried quietly, something she had promised herself she would one day tell him. Their bond remained strong, unshaken by time. They had grown into each other's habits. He would pour her tea just the way she liked it, 2 spoons of sugar and no milk. She would know when he wanted silence or when he needed to talk. Their love was not dramatic anymore. It was peaceful, steady, like a calm sea after years of storms. Neighbors often admired them. People said they were proof that love could last a lifetime if 2 people truly cared. They never showed off their affection, but the way they looked at each other spoke volumes. There was trust, loyalty, and something deeper, an understanding that they had built a life together, not through luck but through effort and forgiveness. Even after 60 years together, he still opened the door for her, still brought her flowers from the garden, and still called her my sunshine. And she still waited by the window when he went out just to see him return. Their lives were quiet now, but their hearts remained full. No one could have guessed that behind her gentle smile she was carrying a truth that had never been spoken aloud. A secret that had lived in her heart since before their wedding day. It was something she never meant to hide forever, but each year that passed made it harder to reveal. She feared it might break the very thing they had built all their lives, and though she didn't know when or how, deep down she felt that before she left this world, she would have to tell him, because love, no matter how strong, still deserves honesty, and she couldn't bear the thought of leaving without sharing what had been buried in her heart for so long. Years passed quietly, like soft waves brushing against the shore. The house that once echoed with the laughter of children was now filled with the calm rhythm of 2 people who had learned to live slowly. Morning light would spill through the curtains, and the smell of tea and freshly baked bread filled the kitchen. He would sit by the window reading the newspaper, while she hummed softly as she cooked. Their life had settled into a peaceful routine, one that felt both comforting and fragile. They had grown old together, but their hearts were still full of love. Their faces showed the marks of time, but their bond remained strong. He often looked at her while she worked around the house, wondering how she still managed to keep everything running so smoothly. Even when her hands trembled slightly, or when she had to stop to catch her breath, she never complained. She would laugh and say, "I'm fine, just a little slow now," and he would smile, though his eyes always carried quiet worry. They spent their evenings in the small garden behind their home. The garden had been her idea years ago, and it had grown beautifully. Flowers, herbs, and even a few fruit trees. He would water the plants while she sat on the bench watching the sun go down. Sometimes they spoke about old memories, about their children and the days when the house was noisy and full of life. Other times they simply sat in silence, their hands resting close, not needing words to feel connected. Their children visited when they could, bringing gifts and stories from the city. The house would come alive again with laughter and movement. The grandchildren would run through the garden, their voices filling the air with joy. Those were her favorite days. She would prepare their favorite dishes, even though her energy didn't allow her to move as quickly as before. He would help her as much as he could, cutting vegetables, setting the table, and making sure she didn't overwork herself. At night, when everyone had left, the house would become quiet again. She often sat by the window watching the moon. Sometimes she would sigh softly, lost in thought. He would notice but didn't ask much. He knew her mind often wandered to the children, or perhaps to memories from their early days. What he didn't know was that she sometimes thought of the one thing she had never spoken about, the secret that had lived inside her for decades. She had carried it for so long that it had become part of her. It didn't control her life anymore, but it never disappeared. There were moments when it returned suddenly like a whisper from the past. It made her heart ache with guilt and fear, But she always pushed it away, convincing herself that it was too late to change anything now. She loved her husband deeply. Every day she felt grateful for the life they had shared. But deep inside she still feared that if he ever knew, the look in his eyes would change, and that was something she could never bear. As time went on, her health began to weaken. At first it was small things: tiredness, pain in her joints, shortness of breath. He insisted she visit the doctor, but she brushed it off. "I'm just getting old," she said with a smile. But he could see that something wasn't right. He started taking over more chores, cooking her favorite meals, and reminding her to rest. He even learned how to make the herbal tea she loved, the one she said helped her sleep better. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sky turn orange, she leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about what life would be like if we hadn't met?" she asked softly. He chuckled and said, "I try not to. I don't think I'd know what to do with myself." She smiled, but there was something heavy in her eyes. She wanted to tell him something, but her voice wouldn't let her. She just whispered, "You've given me a beautiful life," and left it at that. In the months that followed, her illness grew worse. The pain in her body became harder to hide. Some days she couldn't get out of bed. He stayed beside her every moment, helping her sit up, feeding her soup, reading her favorite books aloud. The doctor said it was something that could not be cured, only eased with time. When he heard those words, his heart sank. But he refused to give up. He told her she would get better, that she just needed rest and good care. She would nod, though deep down she already knew her time was growing short. She often looked at him when he wasn't paying attention. She saw the man who had stood by her through everything, the man who had loved her without question. Every wrinkle on his face told a story of their years together, and with every passing day her guilt grew heavier. She thought of how much he had given her, how deeply he had trusted her, and how she had never told him the truth about that one mistake she made so long ago. Sometimes at night, when he was asleep beside her, she whispered softly, "I'm sorry," hoping that somehow her heart could find peace through the words. She wanted to believe that what they had built together was strong enough to forgive even the hardest truth. But every time she tried to imagine telling him, her courage failed. One morning he found her sitting quietly at the kitchen table, staring at an old photo album. She was holding a picture from their wedding day, her fingers tracing the edges of the photograph. He sat down beside her and said, "We looked so young." She smiled faintly and said, "We were, and we didn't know what was ahead of us." He looked at her and said, "If I could live it all again, I'd still choose you." Her eyes filled with tears, and she quickly turned away so he wouldn't notice. She wanted to say the same, but the words caught in her throat. The weight of her secret pressed against her chest like a stone. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the past, about the days before their marriage, the confusion she once felt, the wrong choice she made for a moment before realizing where her heart truly belonged. It had been so long ago, but the memory never faded completely. She told herself that silence was better, that some things didn't need to be said. But now, as she felt her strength fading, she wasn't sure anymore. He deserved the truth, she thought. He had given her nothing but honesty and kindness. He had trusted her with everything he had. The thought of leaving this world without telling him began to feel unbearable. But how could she say it now after all these years? How could she look into his eyes and risk breaking the heart of the man who had loved her more than anyone else in the world? The thought made her chest tighten with pain. In the days that followed, he noticed her growing quieter. She spoke less, slept more, and smiled only when he held her hand. Sometimes he found her staring at him with a strange sadness, as if trying to memorize his face. He didn't understand it, but he stayed close, thinking she was just tired. He didn't know that inside her a storm was building, a mix of fear, love, and regret. She wanted to tell him the truth, but she also wanted to protect him from it. And so she waited, hoping for the right moment. As autumn came, the leaves outside their window began to fall, and the days grew shorter. She knew she didn't have much time left. Each day she looked at him with a growing urgency, wondering if today would be the day she finally spoke. She had spent a lifetime with him, through poverty, laughter, children, and years of quiet companionship. He had been her greatest comfort, her safest place. But now, as her body grew weaker and her breaths became shallow, she realized that love was not complete without truth. And even though she feared what her words might do, she also knew she couldn't carry the secret with her when she was gone. That thought followed her into the night, whispering to her heart, reminding her that love and honesty walk hand in hand even when the truth comes too late. The air inside the house had grown heavy with quiet. Days blended into one another, each one slower than the last. The once busy home now moved at the pace of her breathing, soft, uneven, and fragile. He had stopped working months ago so he could stay by her side. Nothing else mattered anymore. Every morning he woke up early, even before the sun rose, to prepare her breakfast. It wasn't much, just porridge and tea, but he made it with care, just the way she liked it. Sometimes she could only take a few bites, but he never complained. He would smile gently and say, "You'll eat more tomorrow," even when he knew she probably wouldn't. He spent his days tending to her, reading to her, and making sure she was comfortable. Their children called often, worried, offering to come stay, but she would always say, "Your father's here. That's all I need." Her voice had become softer now, almost like a whisper, but her words still carried warmth. He tried his best to stay strong in front of her. He didn't want her to see how much it hurt him to watch her fading away. But sometimes, when she fell asleep, he would step outside into the garden and let the tears come. The garden had always been her favorite place. Now it had become his too. Because every flower reminded him of her. He would water the plants quietly, talking to them as if they could hear him. Maybe in some way she could hear him too. Inside the house, she spent most of her time in the bed near the window. She liked to keep the curtains open so she could see the sunlight and the trees outside. On good days, he would help her sit up, wrap a blanket around her shoulders, and bring her to the chair by the window. She would close her eyes and feel the warmth on her skin, smiling faintly as if remembering something beautiful. "Do you remember the time we planted the first rose bush?" she asked one morning, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, smiling. "You said it would never grow, but it did, just like us." She laughed softly, the sound fragile but real. He reached over and held her hand, feeling how thin and cold it had become. There were moments when she seemed lost in thought. Sometimes she stared out the window for long stretches, silent as if listening to a voice only she could hear. Other times she would call him over suddenly, asking him to sit beside her. "I just like having you near," she would say. He always did as she asked, holding her hand for hours, not saying much. As the days went by, she started having trouble sleeping. She would wake up in the middle of the night, breathing heavily, whispering his name. He would rush to her side, rubbing her back, helping her sip water, whispering words of comfort. "That's all right," he would say softly. "I'm here. You're safe." She would nod, her eyes full of both gratitude and sadness. There were times when she wanted to speak but stopped herself. She would open her mouth, then close it again, shaking her head as if changing her mind. He noticed it, but he didn't push her. He thought maybe she was just tired. What he didn't know was that inside her a storm was growing. She wanted to tell him the truth, the secret she had carried for 60 years, but she couldn't find the courage. One afternoon, as he was helping her take her medicine, she reached for his hand and held it tightly. "There's something I need to tell you," she whispered. His heart stopped for a moment. He looked at her, waiting. But before she could speak, she began to cough violently. He rushed to get her water, and when she calmed down, the moment was gone. She just shook her head and said, "Never mind. It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. He could see it in her eyes. He wanted to ask what it was, but something inside him told him not to. He didn't want to cause her any more pain. He told himself that whatever it was, it couldn't change the love they shared. Yet a quiet unease settled in his chest. Her health continued to decline. The doctor visited more often now. Each time, his words became more serious. "Spend as much time together as you can," he said softly one afternoon before leaving. He stood in the doorway looking at her sleeping face and felt a kind of fear he had never known before. The fear of losing the person who had been his whole world. In the evenings, he still read to her from her favorite books. Even when her eyes stayed closed, he continued, believing she could still hear him. Sometimes she smiled faintly during the stories, and that was enough to keep him reading. But one night something changed. She woke up suddenly, her face pale, her breathing uneven. He helped her sit up, worried. "Do you need the doctor?" he asked, but she shook her head. "No," she whispered. "I just need to talk to you." He sat down beside her, his heart pounding. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes filled with both love and pain. "You've been so good to me," she said. Better than I ever deserved. Don't say that, he replied quickly. You've been my whole life. She smiled weakly, tears forming in her eyes. That's why I have to tell you something, she said, her voice trembling. Something I should have told you a long time ago. He froze, unsure of what to say. Her hand shook as she tried to speak. Before we got married, she whispered, I made a mistake. I didn't know what I wanted back then. I was scared. I hurt someone, and I hurt myself too. Her words came out slowly, broken by breaths. I thought I could forget it, that it didn't matter anymore once we built this life together. But it's been inside me all these years. He stared at her, his mind trying to make sense of her words. She looked at him, pleading. I never stopped loving you, she said. From the day I met you, you were my heart. But I couldn't leave this world without being honest. I don't want to take any lies with me. Tears filled his eyes, but he stayed quiet. His heart felt heavy, torn between love and shock. He had spent a lifetime believing their love had no shadows, no hidden corners. Now sitting there in the dim light, he realized there was something he had never known. She began to cry softly. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I don't want you to hate me. I just couldn't go without telling you the truth. He didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was all right. Another part of him felt like something inside him had cracked. He reached for her hand, holding it tightly, unsure if it was out of love or disbelief. She looked at him one last time and said, I love you. Always have. Always will. Then she closed her eyes, exhausted. He sat there beside her, unable to move, his heart pounding in silence. The clock ticked softly in the background. The night felt endless. He kept watching her chest rise and fall, afraid it might stop at any moment. When she finally drifted into sleep, he sat back, staring into the darkness, replaying her words in his mind. He didn't sleep that night. His thoughts ran in circles, memories of their years together, her laughter, her kindness, and now this confession that had shaken everything he believed about their life. But even in his confusion, one thing remained clear. He loved her. Maybe love wasn't about perfection. Maybe it was about forgiveness. As morning light crept through the window, he took her hand again. Her skin was cold, but he held on. He whispered softly, Rest now. We'll talk later. But deep down, he knew they might never have that talk again. And as the sun rose, painting the sky in pale gold, he realized that even the deepest love can carry secrets, and that sometimes truth comes too late to change anything, but just in time to change how a heart remembers. The days after her confession felt unreal. The house was the same, yet everything inside him had changed. He moved through the rooms quietly, doing all the usual things, making her breakfast, helping her sit up, adjusting her blanket. But his thoughts wouldn't stop spinning. Every word she had said kept echoing in his mind. He loved her. That had never changed. But now there was a strange ache in his heart, a mix of confusion, sadness, and disbelief. For so many years he had believed their story was pure, untouched by secrets. Now he knew that even love as deep as theirs had cracks hidden beneath the surface. She could sense the distance in him. Though he never said a harsh word, she could see it in the way he looked at her, gentle but quieter than before. It broke her heart to know she had hurt him. She wanted to speak again, to explain everything, but her strength was fading fast. One evening, as rain tapped softly on the window, she reached for his hand. He hesitated for a moment before taking it. Her fingers were cold and trembling. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said weakly. I just couldn't leave without telling you the truth. You've given me more love than I ever thought I deserved. He stayed silent for a long time, watching the rain fall. Then he said softly, Why didn't you tell me before? Tears filled her eyes. I was afraid, she whispered. Afraid you'd see me differently. Afraid you'd stop loving me. At first I thought it didn't matter anymore. It was long before we started our life together. But as the years passed, it felt heavier. Every time you told me how thankful you were for me, I felt the guilt inside me grow stronger. He looked at her, his eyes filled with both pain and compassion. All these years, he said quietly, we faced everything together. I wish you had trusted me enough to tell me then. She nodded slowly. I know I should have, but I didn't want to destroy the life we built. I loved you too much to take that risk. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the rain filled the silence. He wanted to be angry, to let out the storm that was building inside him. But looking at her fragile face, pale and tired, the anger melted into sorrow. What good would anger do now? He sighed deeply and squeezed her hand. You made a mistake, he said softly. We all do. But everything after that was real. I know that. Her lips trembled as she whispered. It was real. Every moment of it. You were my heart. That night he sat by her bedside for hours. She slept fitfully, her breathing shallow, sometimes murmuring his name in her sleep. He watched her, remembering the decades they had spent side by side, the laughter, the struggles, the endless little moments that had built their life. He thought about the young woman she once was, the one who had walked into his life full of light and hope. He realized then that her mistake didn't erase everything they had shared. It was a piece of her past, but it didn't define her love for him. The next morning he woke to find her staring at him quietly. Her eyes looked softer, almost peaceful. You stayed all night, she said weakly. I didn't want to leave, he replied. She smiled faintly. You always keep your promises. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Always, he said. As the days went on, her condition worsened. The doctor came often, his face growing more serious each time. It's time to prepare, he said gently one afternoon. Those words hit him like a wave. He stood in the doorway for a long time after the doctor left, staring at nothing, trying to imagine a world without her. He spent every moment beside her after that. He read to her when she could still listen. When she couldn't, he simply talked to her. He told her about the children, about the garden, about the sunrise he saw that morning. She listened quietly, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying. One night she asked him to open the window. The air was cool and still. The moonlight poured in, bathing the room in a soft glow. It's beautiful, she whispered. Do you remember when we used to sit outside just to watch the stars? He nodded. You always said the stars looked brighter when you were happy. She smiled faintly. Then I suppose they'll shine brighter tonight. He felt his throat tighten. He wanted to tell her how much she meant to him, how much he would miss her. But the words stuck in his chest. She seemed to sense it. You don't have to say anything, she said softly. I know. Her breathing grew weaker as the night went on. She seemed to drift in and out of sleep, her hand never leaving his. Around midnight she stirred and looked at him with tired eyes. Promise me something, she whispered. Anything, he said quickly. Don't let this be the last thing you remember about me. Remember the laughter, the days in the garden, the life we built. Not my mistake. Tears streamed down his face. I'll remember all of it, he said. Every part of you, she smiled weakly. You were my home. Those were the last words she spoke. He sat beside her, holding her hand as her breathing slowed. The night was so still that he could hear his own heartbeat. Then slowly, the rhythm of her breath faded into silence. For a long time, he didn't move. He just sat there holding her hand, unable to let go. The room felt empty without her voice, her presence. The world outside continued as if nothing had changed, but for him, everything had. When the sun rose, he finally stood up. He went to the window and looked out at the garden. The roses were in bloom, the same ones they had planted together all those years ago. He felt a deep ache in his chest, but also a strange peace. She was gone, but her love still lingered everywhere, in the flowers, in the walls of their home, in every memory they had created. The funeral was simple, just like she would have wanted. Their children and grandchildren came, filling the small church with quiet tears and memories. He listened to them speak about her kindness, her laughter, the way she made everyone feel loved. No one mentioned her secret. It was something only he knew, something he would carry alone. After everyone left, he stayed by her grave long after sunset. The air grew cold, but he didn't mind. He sat on the ground, tracing the letters of her name on the stone. You should have trusted me, he whispered. But I forgive you. His voice broke as he said it. I loved you then, I love you still. He looked up at the night sky. The stars were shining bright, just as she had said they would. He felt tears fall again, but they were softer this time. He realized that love was never perfect. It was made of joy and sorrow, of truth and forgiveness. When he finally stood to leave, he took one last look at her resting place. I'll take care of the garden, he said quietly. The roses will always bloom for you. And with that, he turned toward home, alone, but carrying her love within him, as steady and endless as the night sky above. The days after her passing felt endless. The house, once full of her laughter and gentle humming, now stood silent. Every room carried her presence, the faint smell of her perfume, the folded blanket she had used on the couch, the teacup she had left on the kitchen shelf. Nothing felt right without her. He found himself talking to her sometimes as if she were still sitting nearby. "You'd laugh at me right now," he'd say while watering the plants or fixing a loose cabinet door. It brought him a small comfort, even if no voice answered back. The children came to visit often. They tried to keep him company, to help him eat, to make him smile. But they didn't understand that grief isn't something you fix, it's something you live with. When they left, the silence returned, and it felt even heavier. He spent most of his days in the garden. It had always been their favorite place. She used to say the flowers talked to her, that each one carried a memory. He believed her now. When the wind moved through the leaves, it felt like her whisper. When the sun touched his face, it felt like her warmth. He took care of the roses with the same devotion he had once shown her. Every morning he trimmed the branches, watered the soil, and spoke to the flowers softly, as if they could hear. "She'd like this," he would say. "She always loved the red ones." Time moved slowly. Weeks turned into months. He learned to live with the emptiness, though it never truly left him. He missed the small things, the way she would call him for dinner, the way she'd correct him when he misplaced something, the way she'd smile when he brought her a single flower from the garden. Sometimes at night he would sit by the window and think about her confession, the secret she had carried for all those years. It had hurt him deeply when she first told him, but now he saw it differently. He realized it wasn't betrayal that defined her. It was love. She had carried that guilt because she didn't want to lose him, and in the end she had trusted him enough to tell the truth. That mattered more than the secret itself. He thought about forgiveness a lot. He realized that forgiveness wasn't just something you gave once, it was something you chose again and again every day. And as time passed, the pain of her confession softened, replaced by understanding. One evening, as he watched the sunset, he found himself smiling. "You always said sunsets were sad," he whispered. "But I think they're beautiful. They mean another day lived." He began writing letters to her, though he knew she'd never read them. Each letter started the same way. "My love." He wrote about everything: the weather, the children, the quiet days, the nights that felt too long. Writing made him feel close to her, like he was still sharing his life with her. Sometimes he would leave the letters in the garden, under the roses she loved most. The paper would fade in the rain, and the ink would blur, but that didn't matter. He liked to think the words became part of the soil, part of the flowers that bloomed for her. One day their eldest daughter came to visit. She found him sitting on the porch with a letter in his hand. "You still write to her?" she asked softly. He smiled gently. "Every day." She sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "You miss her a lot." "I do," he said. "But I also feel her here, in everything." His daughter nodded, tears in her eyes. "She'd be happy you're keeping her garden alive." "She's the reason it blooms," he said simply. Years passed. His hair turned white, his steps slower, but his spirit stayed gentle. The neighbors often saw him outside, tending to the garden with care. Some called him the man with the roses. They didn't know the story behind them, but they could see the love in every corner of his yard. Every spring, the roses blossomed brighter than before. People said it was because he looked after them so well, but he liked to think it was her doing. As time went on, his health began to fade. The children visited more often, worried about him living alone. But he always said he was fine. "I'm not alone," he would say with a soft smile. "She's here." One night he sat by the window looking at the stars. They were shining brighter than usual. He remembered her last words, the way she had said the stars would shine brighter when she was happy. He smiled faintly. "You must be smiling tonight," he whispered. He went to bed that night with her photograph beside him, the same one he had kept on his nightstand since she passed. The next morning the house was quiet again, but this time peacefully so. When his children found him, he looked calm as if he were sleeping. His hand rested on her picture, and there was a faint smile on his face. They buried him beside her, under the old oak tree near the garden, the same place where they had once sat together every evening, watching the sunset. The family gathered to say goodbye, and as they stood there, a gentle breeze moved through the garden, scattering rose petals across their graves. It felt like a whisper, a sign of love that never faded. Over the years, people who passed by their home often stopped to admire the garden. The roses still bloomed each spring, strong and bright, just as they always had. Some said it was because of the care he had given them. Others believed it was something more, a love that refused to die even after life had ended. Their story became something people spoke of quietly, with a sense of warmth. Two people who had lived a full life together, who had known both joy and pain, truth and forgiveness. A love that had faced its hardest moment and still endured. In the end, his forgiveness had become a part of their legacy. It taught their children and grandchildren something important, that love isn't perfect, but it's real. That sometimes forgiveness is the greatest form of love there is. The youngest grandchild, who never met them, would often play in the garden. One day she asked her mother, "Why do the roses here bloom so much?" Her mother smiled gently and said, "Because they were planted with love, and love never dies." The child looked around, curious, then picked one of the roses and held it close. "They smell happy," she said innocently, and maybe, in a way, she was right. Because love, true love, has a scent that never fades. It lingers in the air, in the flowers, in the memories that refuse to leave. It lives on in the hearts of those who remember, and in the stories that continue to be told long after the people are gone. The garden remained, untouched by time. The roses kept blooming, their petals soft and bright, and whenever the wind passed through, it carried a whisper, soft, tender, and full of peace. It was the sound of a promise kept, a love that lasted not just through a lifetime, but beyond it.